Jordan Briggs was 34 years old, and until that Tuesday evening, he believed he was building something permanent. He was a structural engineer who designed bridges for a living, a man whose entire career was built on the principle that what you construct must be strong enough to hold real weight. His wife Anika called him safe, called him steady, introduced him at dinner parties as the man who did bridge stuff. What Jordan didn't know was that for 14 months, while he was turning down a $40,000 raise to stay in Atlanta because she asked him to, Anika had been meeting her childhood best friend in hotel rooms 2 miles from their house, and quietly adding his name to a business she built with Jordan's own money. The night she left divorce papers on the kitchen island, she was certain she already knew exactly who Jordan Briggs was. She had no idea she had never met him at all. What happened in the next 24 hours would prove it. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house was quiet in a way that had stopped feeling peaceful. Jordan noticed it the moment he stepped through the front door. That particular silence that isn't restful but empty, the kind that presses against your ears. He set his bag down by the entryway and stood still for a moment, the way he always did when he walked into a new structure for the first time, reading the room, taking inventory. Everything was in its place, too much in its place. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged with the kind of precision that only happens when someone is not planning to come back and sit on them. The kitchen counters were bare and wiped clean. Not cleaned, staged. There was a difference, and he felt it the way he felt a millimeter of variance in a load calculation. Small, but wrong. His bag held 3 spiral notebooks, each labeled in his tight, deliberate handwriting. Bridge expansion, Phase 2 load analysis, municipal deck survey, Q3, culvert revision notes. He had filled the margins of the top one during his lunch break with force distribution sketches that his project manager would probably call excessive, and that Jordan considered the minimum. The $4.2 million contract his firm had landed 2 weeks ago existed largely because the client had looked at his structural drawings and seen something they trusted. That was the whole of it. Not charm, not presentation. Just work that held up when examined closely. He set the notebooks on the entryway table, loosened his collar, and walked to the kitchen. The envelope was on the island, white, letter-sized, his name written on the front in Anika's handwriting. The careful, looping cursive she used for anything she wanted to look intentional. No return address, no context. Just Jordan, centered on the front, like a verdict. He picked it up. It had the density of multiple pages. He already knew what it was, the way you know a structure is compromised before you've run the numbers. A bone-deep reading of the situation that the data will later confirm. He opened it anyway. They had been together 7 years, married 5. He had known Anika was beautiful the moment he met her. That wasn't the kind of thing a person missed. But what had actually drawn him in was her precision. She moved through a room like she understood the architecture of it. She knew where to stand, what to say, how to make a gathering feel curated rather than accidental. He had found that remarkable back then. Later, he would understand that this same skill had a shadow side. It meant she was always composing the scene, always managing what things looked like, including him. It had started gradually, the way erosion always does, not with cruelty, with small reframings, tiny editorial adjustments to how he was described when he was not present to describe himself. Jordan is so steady, she would say at dinner parties, with a tone that made steady sound like a consolation prize. He does bridge stuff to a couple they met at a gallery opening while Jordan was standing right there, 3 years into a career that had won a state engineering commendation. He's safe, you know. That's not nothing. He had heard that 1 second hand from a friend of a friend who did not realize he would ever loop back to Jordan. Safe. In Annika's mouth, the word did not sound like a compliment. It sounded like a diagnosis, like something she was building a case around. He had felt it. The slow narrowing, the way she talked over him at dinners, not rudely but smoothly, the way you switch lanes on the highway without signaling, practiced, confident, certain the car being overtaken will simply adjust. He had adjusted. He had told himself it was the rhythm of a long marriage, the rough edges of two people whose schedules were demanding and whose energy at the end of the day ran thin. He had not named what it actually was. He pulled the papers from the envelope and unfolded them on the kitchen island. Divorce petition. Annika's signature on the bottom, neat and deliberate, as her handwriting always was. Notarized. The stamp and seal of a notary public in Fulton County, dated 6 days ago. She had been holding these for almost a week. Paper-clipped to the front page was a handwritten note. 3 sentences on a small card. No name at the top or the bottom. I can't keep pretending this is enough. I found what I actually want. I'm sorry it took me this long to be honest. Jordan read the note once, set it down, picked it back up, and read it again. Not because the meaning was unclear, but because he was not a man who moved past a thing before he understood it completely. Then he gathered every page of the divorce documents and carried them down the hall to his home office. He sat at his desk. He turned on the lamp. He read the petition the way he read every document that mattered, from the first line to the last, carefully, looking for what was there and what was missing. When he finished, he set the papers on the edge of his desk. He pulled his laptop toward him and opened it. The shared account was still saved in his browser. 3 years ago, they had set it up together at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. A joint cloud backup for household records, tax documents, insurance policies, the kind of digital filing cabinet that responsible adults maintain and rarely open. Annika had picked the folder names. Jordan had set up the permissions and linked both their phones to the sync. He had not thought about the account in months. He navigated to it now out of habit, the same instinct that made him check the foundation before the walls. Start at the base, work upward, know what you're standing on before you commit any weight to it. He was looking for financial record. The divorce petition had referenced joint assets in language vague enough to warrant a closer look, and he wanted numbers in front of him before he called anyone. The account opened. The folder structure was exactly as he remembered. Tax returns, insurance, home documents, vehicle records, all of them organized and labeled the way he had set them up. But there was a 5th folder that had not been there before, sitting at the bottom of the list without a label, just a string of numbers that looked like an auto-generated sync timestamp. He clicked it. The folder contained 214 files, screenshots, synced automatically from Annika's phone to the shared account. A sync setting she had apparently forgotten was turned on, or perhaps never checked closely enough to notice. The images had been uploading in small batches for over a year, each one saved from her messages or her email and captured to her camera roll, then quietly carried into the joint account like sediment, building up at the bottom of a river. Jordan did not rush through them. He opened the first file. A hotel receipt. 2 nights. A property in Buckhead. 14 months ago. The name on the reservation was Annika Powell, her maiden name. The total was $408. He opened the next file. A text thread. The contact name at the top was D. The messages had the specific cadence of 2 people who had developed their own shorthand. References without context, the kind of easy, compressed language that only exists between people who have been talking for a very long time without interruption. He opened the next file. A photograph. Annika, in a hotel room he did not recognize, her head tilted back, mid-laugh, genuinely happy in a way he had not seen in longer than he could accurately place. And beside her, his arm along the back of the chair, completely at ease. Dominic Frazier. Jordan looked at the photo for a long time. Dominic Frazier. He knew the name, the way you know the names of people who exist in the background of a marriage, without ever fully entering it. Someone Annika mentioned occasionally. An old friend from growing up. A childhood best friend she had stayed loosely connected to. Real estate, Jordan recalled. Growing portfolio. Atlanta's commercial corridor. Polished. The kind of man who assessed a room by its potential value. He worked through the rest of the folder methodically. The hotel receipt was not a one-time event. There were more. 3 properties across 14 months, all in Atlanta, all in Annika's maiden name. There were message screenshots spanning the same period. The conversation moving from familiar to intimate, to something that had clearly long since passed the point of return. There were photographs that confirmed what the receipts and the messages had already built toward. This was not a recent collapse. It was not a desperate, sudden thing. It was maintained, deliberate. A relationship that had been running steadily in the background of his life for over a year, constructed carefully, and tended consistently. The way you tend something you intend to keep. He found the earliest receipt, pulled up the date. 14 months ago. He sat back in his chair and did the math he had already done without meaning to, the calculation that had assembled itself while he was still reading, and arrived complete before he consciously asked for it. 14 months ago was 3 months after Houston. The offer had been real. $40,000 more per year, a project that would have defined the next decade of his career, a firm in Houston that had specifically requested him by name after reading his structural drawings on a state contract. He had held the offer letter for a week. He had sat across from Annika at their kitchen table and laid it out. The numbers, the timeline, the scope of what the project represented. She had listened. She had taken his hand. "My whole community is here," she had said. "Everything I've built is here. I'm not ready to leave that, Jordan. I need you to stay." He had stayed. He had emailed the Houston firm a polite final decline. He had gone back to his desk and redirected every professional ambition he had been aiming at that offer back into the work he already had. The way you reinforce a structure from the inside when you can't expand its footprint. He had not resented her for it. He believed her. 3 months later, she was in a hotel in Buckhead with Dominic Frazier. The receipt was dated. The math did not forgive itself for being simple. Jordan closed the laptop. He sat in the silence of his home office for a moment, not processing, not performing grief, just letting the weight of the information distribute correctly before he moved. That was how he had always handled load. Not by refusing it, by finding the right places to put it. Then he picked up the divorce papers. He uncapped a pen and signed every page, every signature line, every initial box in the margins where the documents required one. He did not hesitate, and he did not rush. His handwriting was the same on the last page as it was on the first, controlled, deliberate. The signature of a man who signs a thing because he means it. He slid the papers into the return envelope, sealed it, set it at the edge of the desk. Then he picked up his phone and called Camille Okafor. She answered on the second ring. "I need you tonight," he said. "Can you come?" A pause. Short. The kind that meant she was already reaching for her keys. "On my way," she said. Camille arrived at 9:47 p.m. She came through the front door with a coffee carrier in one hand and a legal pad under her arm. The way she always arrived when something required her full attention. No preamble, no performance, just Camille moving at the speed of a woman who had already decided what needed to happen next. "Sit," she said, setting the coffees on the kitchen island. "Talk." Jordan talked. He laid it out in order, the way he laid out everything, sequentially, without editorializing, starting with the envelope and ending with the sealed return package at the edge of his desk, the cloud folder, the hotel receipts across 14 months, the message threads, the photograph, the Houston timeline. Every piece placed in line like load calculations, each one carrying its own weight, each one connected to the next. Camille took notes without interrupting. Her pen moved steadily across the legal pad. She did not react to the photograph. She did not react to the Houston detail, though her jaw shifted slightly in a way Jordan recognized from 18 years of friendship as the specific expression she made when she was absorbing something she found particularly contemptible, and choosing not to say so yet. When Jordan finished, she reviewed her notes for a moment. Then she set down her pen. "She filed for divorce," Camille said. "You signed back. That was not a mistake." She picked up her coffee. "Discovery is required regardless of how quickly you respond. The timeline doesn't change. Your documentation doesn't weaken. You didn't give anything away by signing. You gave her the impression that this is going to be simple. That impression is useful." Jordan nodded. Camille was already pulling up something on her phone. "Tell me the name of her business." "Premier Day Events," Jordan said. "She registered the LLC about 2 years ago." Camille typed, waited, read. The expression on her face moved through 3 distinct stages in the space of about 10 seconds. Recognition, calculation, and then something that settled into a quiet, controlled satisfaction. She turned the phone around and placed it flat on the island in front of Jordan. "The Georgia Secretary of State business registration for Premier Day Events, LLC, the filing date, the registered agent, and at the bottom of the screen, under Member Organizer Information, 2 names, Annika R. Briggs and Dominic A. Frazier. She added him as a silent co-owner 6 months ago," Camille said, "while she was still legally your wife." Jordan looked at the screen. "The startup costs," Camille continued, already flipping back through his joint account statements, which he had printed and placed in the folder without being asked. She found the page and ran her finger down the column. "Here, here, and here. 3 transfers across 4 months, each one from the joint savings account. $23,000 total. Your combined money." His name on the paperwork. Jordan said nothing. He looked at the numbers. "She built her exit with your foundation," Camille said, "and she put his name on the building while you were still inside it." She recapped her pen. "That is not a technicality. That is a documented act conducted during the marriage, and it gives your counterfiling real leverage. We flag the commingled assets, the co-ownership, the financial transfers. I file the counter-response tomorrow morning. The court will require full discovery. She cannot restructure the LLC, liquidate it, or change its ownership structure while the review is active. Everything freezes." She picked up her coffee again. "She thought she was walking away clean," Camille said. "She is about to find out what she actually filed for." The counter-response was filed by 9 a.m. At 9:18, Jordan sent Annika a text. "Papers signed. My attorney will be in touch." Her response came in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. He watched the 3 dots appear and resolve. "Thank you. I just want this to be peaceful." He read it once, set his phone face down on the desk. Peaceful. The word she reached for every time she meant easy for me. He recognized the pattern now with the clean clarity of a man who has finally stopped trying to read a document charitably. He met Zara at Alma at 7. She was already mid-sentence when they reached the door, telling him something about a resident who had managed to confuse 2 completely different procedures in a way that was either alarming or genuinely impressive depending on how you looked at it. And her laugh was already in the story before the punchline arrived. She had that quality. She filled the space around her without requiring it to accommodate her. The hostess looked up. Jordan held the door. Inside, Alma was the kind of restaurant that did not announce itself. Warm light, unhurried service, linen that had been pressed correctly. They were seated at a corner table, and Zara ordered without looking at the menu, the way people do when they have already thought about what they want, which Jordan had come to understand was how she approached most things. They talked the way they had been talking for 8 months, easily, with the specific comfort of two people who have paid close attention to each other long enough that the gaps in conversation don't require filling. 40 minutes in, Jordan reached for his water glass. He saw them before Annika saw him. The hostess was leading them through the main floor. Annika's hand on Dominic's arm, her laugh calibrated perfectly, the practiced brightness of a woman performing a choice she needed the world to affirm. Dominic was saying something. She was leaning in. They were doing everything couples do in public when the public is the point. The hostess walked them directly past Jordan's table. Annika turned her head the way people turn their heads in a restaurant, out of habit, a casual sweep, and her eyes landed on Jordan, then moved left, to Zara. The laugh ended, not dramatically. It simply stopped, like a wire pulled from its connection. Her feet stopped moving. Dominic took one more step forward before he registered the absence of her beside him and turned back. She was standing completely still. Jordan held her eyes for 3 seconds. He did not shift in his seat. He did not alter his expression. He offered her nothing. No acknowledgement, no adjustment, no indication that her presence had registered as anything requiring a response. She was a variable he had already accounted for. He returned his attention to Zara with the ease of a man who is exactly where he intended to be. Zara had absorbed the entire exchange with the peripheral precision of someone who spent years reading rooms under pressure. She did not turn to look. She did not ask. She placed her hand over Jordan's on the table, not for the room, not for Annika, but with the calm of a person putting their hand exactly where it belonged. Dominic steered Annika toward their table. She went. She sat. She was 12 feet away and directly in Zara's eyeline for the rest of the evening. And Jordan did not look over once. He did not need to. He knew, without checking, what Annika was seeing from her seat. Not a man in pieces. Not the steady, safe, predictable structure she had been quietly narrating to her friends for 2 years. She was looking at a man who had signed her papers the same night they arrived, retained a corporate attorney by morning, and was now having dinner with a woman who moved through the world like she had never once questioned her right to be in it. Annika pushed her food around her plate. Dominic refilled her wine. Jordan finished his meal. He and Zara stayed for dessert. He drove home with the windows down. The Atlanta night was warm, and the city moved around him with its usual indifferent hum, traffic thinning, lights cycling, the streets doing what streets do, regardless of what any particular person is carrying through them. Jordan kept one hand on the wheel. The air moved through the car and settled. He was not victorious. It was too early for that. What he felt was something quieter and more durable than victory. The solid, weight-tested certainty of a man who has run the calculations, checked the load, and confirmed that what he is standing on will hold. 2 weeks out. Jordan stood at the long drafting table in the center of his firm's project room, both hands flat on the spread of blueprints, his eyes moving across the load calculations the way they always moved, slowly, precisely, from the point of greatest stress outward. The bridge expansion drawings were his. Every critical measurement, every anchor specification, every load-bearing calculation. The $4.2 million municipal contract had landed largely because of these drawings, and everyone in the firm knew it, even if no one said it in exactly those words. His project manager, Dale, knocked on the open door. "Fulton County called this morning," Dale said. "They want to move the structural review meeting up to Thursday." "Thursday works," Jordan said, without looking up. Dale left. Jordan straightened. He rolled the blueprints carefully from one end and placed them in the tube on the corner of the table, and then he stood in the quiet of the room for a moment. The clean, organized quiet of a space built around actual work, and felt the specific satisfaction of a man whose professional life was moving in exactly one direction: up. Camille's counterfiling had done what Camille said it would do. Annika's attorney, a solo practitioner who had clearly been retained for a simple, uncontested proceeding, was recalibrating. Jordan could tell from the phrasing in the correspondence Camille forwarded him. The language had shifted from confident and directive to careful and probing, the way language shifts when a lawyer realizes the other side has a folder. Discovery was fully underway. Every joint account statement, every business filing, every transfer. Jordan's personal finances were untouched. He had maintained a separate investment account for 6 years, a habit his father drilled into him so early it never felt like a precaution, just common sense. His 401k was fully funded. His savings were organized and documented with the same precision he brought to every system he managed. He had not been careless. He had never been careless. Annika had built her plan around a version of Jordan that did not exist. He and Zara walked after dinner on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks since the papers arrived. The neighborhood was quiet. Old trees on both sides of the sidewalk, their roots pushing up through the concrete in places, the way strong things do when they have been in the ground long enough. Zara was talking about a surgery from that afternoon. Not the grim parts, but the mechanical problem of it, the way she had to think around an unexpected variable and adjust in real time, and the way her voice sounded when she talked about her work was exactly the way Jordan's voice sounded when he talked about his, like someone describing something they genuinely understood. She stopped at the corner and looked at him. "Did she ever understand what you actually do?" Zara asked. Jordan walked the next block without answering, not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer deserved the space to land correctly. "She understood it paid well," he said. Zara didn't offer sympathy. She gave him the quiet, focused look of someone who found that answer clarifying rather than sad. Then she nodded, once, and they kept walking. The fragments came back to him in pieces, the way things do when you finally stop working to keep them submerged. A dinner party at the Hendersons, 2 years ago, maybe 2.5. Jordan had been talking to Marcus Henderson about the highway overpass project, the one that had gone 3 months over schedule because of a soil composition problem nobody had caught in the initial survey. Marcus had asked the right question. Jordan was mid-explanation when Annika appeared at his elbow with the bright, redirecting energy of a woman managing a conversation she found inconvenient. "He does bridge stuff," she said, touching Marcus's arm with easy warmth. "Very technical, very Jordan." She laughed. Marcus laughed. The conversation moved on. Jordan had kept his expression neutral. He was good at that. He remembered sitting in the car, outside the brunch spot on Peachtree, while Annika was inside with her friends. 2 mimosas, so he had driven her, and now he was parked in the shade waiting, reading on his phone. Later that night, she mentioned, with the specific carelessness of someone who didn't register the weight of what they were saying, that the girls had been asking about Houston. "What did you tell them?" Jordan had asked. "Just that you don't really like change," she said. "That you're more of a stability guy." He remembered looking at her for a moment. Stability. Like it was a limitation. Like it was something a man settled into when he ran out of larger ambition. Like the man who designed the structure that held the weight was less interesting than the man who named the building. He hadn't said anything. He had moved on, the way he moved on from most things then, by distributing the weight and continuing to stand. He was at his desk on a Friday evening, cross-referencing project timelines, when his phone lit up. "Dad." Jordan picked up. "Hey." Warren Briggs's voice was level and unhurried, the way it always was, a man who had spent 4 decades measuring twice before he said a word. "I need to drive up," Warren said. "Got something I've been sitting on. Should have said something sooner, maybe. But I need to tell you in person." Warren Briggs arrived at 7:15 in the morning with a paper bag from the grocery store and no announcement beyond the text he had sent the night before. "On my way. Don't eat." Jordan unlocked the door, And Warren came in the way he always came in, without theater, without needing to be welcomed into a space. He set the bag on the counter and started opening cabinets, locating what he needed the same way he located anything in an unfamiliar space, methodically, without asking. Jordan sat at the kitchen table and drank his coffee and watched his father cook. Warren scrambled eggs with sharp cheddar and diced onion, the way he had made them for 30 years. He toasted 4 slices of bread and buttered them while they were still hot. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot Jordan had already brewed and set a plate in front of his son before sitting down across from him with his own. They ate for a few minutes without talking. This was not unusual. Warren Briggs had never confused silence with absence. He was present in a room the way a load-bearing wall was present. You didn't always notice it, but everything was organized around it. He set down his fork. He wrapped both hands around his mug. 8 months ago, Warren said, a man named Dominic Frazier called me. Jordan went still. He introduced himself as a family friend. Said he'd heard about you through Annika's circle, that he'd met you once or twice at events. Warren's voice stayed level. No anger in it, just the flat, careful delivery of a man reading back measurements he had been storing for a long time. He asked how you were doing. Made conversation. Real easy, real warm, and then he started asking questions. Jordan put down his own fork. He asked if you kept savings outside of your joint accounts. Warren looked at his son directly, said something like, Jordan always struck me as the type who likes to be prepared. Made it sound like admiration. Then he asked if I knew much about the contracts at your firm, whether they were structured through the company or whether you took on independent work. Warren paused, and then he asked whether you were the type of man who fought back in a difficult situation, whether you tended to contest things or let them work themselves out. The kitchen was completely quiet. I told him you were doing fine, Warren said. Changed the subject twice. Third time, I told him I had something on the stove and ended the call. Jordan sat back slowly in his chair. I didn't know what it meant, Warren said. Not for certain. I didn't want to put something in your head that might not be anything. Your marriage was... He stopped. Picked his words the way he picked wire gauge, for the load they needed to carry. I didn't want to be the reason you started looking at your wife sideways on a maybe. Warren's jaw tightened briefly. I should have told you sooner. I've been sitting with that. Jordan looked at the table. He wasn't looking at the wood grain. He was looking at the geometry of what he had just been handed. Rotating it, testing the joints, checking where it connected to everything else he already knew. It connected everywhere. This was not a love story that got complicated. This was not two people who found their way back to each other and made a hard choice. Dominic Frazier had called Warren Briggs 8 months ago to map the terrain, to find out how much Jordan had, how well it was protected, and how hard he was likely to push back when they moved. He had used Annika's family connections to get Warren's number, framed himself as a concerned friend, and conducted a clean, deliberate intelligence operation on a man whose marriage he was already inside. He had targeted Warren specifically. He had calculated that a father in Savannah might know things a careful son wouldn't put in a shared account. Jordan breathed out through his nose. He picked up his phone and called Camille. She answered on the second ring. Warren's here, Jordan said. He has something you need to hear. Camille arrived within 40 minutes. She sat across from Warren at the same kitchen table and listened without interrupting, the same way she had listened to Jordan 2 weeks ago. Pen moving steadily, face professionally composed, giving nothing away about what she was thinking until she was ready to deliver it with precision. When Warren finished, Camille set down her pen. Mr. Briggs, she said, I'm going to need you to put everything you just told me into a written statement. Signed, witnessed, and notarized. Whatever it needs to be, Warren said. Camille looked at Jordan. This changes the shape of everything. Two parties coordinating to gather intelligence on a third party's finances in anticipation of a legal action. She said it, evenly, clinically, the way she said things when they were most serious. That is not a marital dispute. That is civil conspiracy. And Dominic Frazier just moved from the background of this case to the center of it. Jordan nodded once. His name goes in the filing, Camille said. Formally. Everything he did, the call, the questions, the LLC co-ownership. It gets documented as coordinated conduct. She closed her legal pad. He wanted to know if you'd fight back. She picked up her coffee cup. He's about to find out. Warren left mid-afternoon. Jordan walked him to his truck, and they stood in the driveway for a moment in the thin autumn light. Warren was not a man who prolonged goodbyes. He put one hand briefly on Jordan's shoulder. Your grandfather poured foundations for other people's houses for 30 years, he said. I pulled wire through walls so other people could flip the switch and never once think about what made the lights come on. He looked at his son steadily. You build bridges. We have always built things that last. That is not a small life, Jordan. He dropped his hand, got in the truck. Jordan stood in the driveway and watched him go. He didn't move for a long time. He was doing what he always did with weight, letting it distribute correctly, finding where it settled, making sure the structure beneath him could hold it. It could. He went back inside. The call came at 8:47 in the morning. Jordan was at his drafting table, second cup of coffee cooling at his elbow, when his phone lit up with Annika's name. He looked at it for one full ring. Then he answered. Jordan. Her voice was warm, practiced. I've been thinking, I don't want this to become something ugly. Can we get coffee? Talk like two adults who spent 7 years together? Jordan pulled his notepad toward him, made a small note at the top of the page. Sure, he said. Text me where. She picked a cafe in Buckhead, the kind of place with exposed brick and handwritten menus and enough ambient noise to make a difficult conversation feel less exposed. Jordan arrived 10 minutes early, chose a table against the wall with a clear view of the door, and ordered water. He did not check his phone while he waited. Annika came in 7 minutes later wearing a camel-colored coat he hadn't seen before. Her hair was done. Her makeup was precise. She had dressed for something. Not coffee, but whatever she intended coffee to become. She spotted him, smiled, and moved through the room with the ease of a woman who was accustomed to being looked at. Jordan stood briefly, the way his father had raised him to. Then he sat back down. Thank you for coming, she said, settling into the chair across from him. She set her bag down carefully, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him with an expression that was calibrated to be both warm and a little pained. I'm doing this hard thing because I care about us. That was the expression. Jordan recognized the architecture of it. He waited. She ordered a latte from the server, made small talk about the neighborhood, about the November cold coming in. Jordan answered when she directed a question at him and asked nothing in return. He let her drive. It took her about 4 minutes to start fishing. I heard you've retained someone, she said. For the proceedings. Yes. Is it someone aggressive or… She tilted her head slightly. I just want to know if we're doing this the hard way. I'd rather we didn't. What way would you prefer? Jordan asked. Peaceful, she said. Clean. We're not enemies, Jordan. We never were. He nodded slowly, as if considering this. She moved on to Zara, less directly, the way she moved toward most things she actually wanted. A comment about how she was glad he had people around him. A pause. A careful, you seemed well, the other night. The sentence hung in the air waiting to become a question. Jordan picked up his water glass, took a drink, set it back down. Annika changed lanes. I know this is painful. She leaned forward slightly. Her voice dropped to something softer, something that was almost kind. But I think if you're really honest with yourself, I think deep down you know this was right for both of us. We weren't. She paused, selecting her word. We weren't growing in the same direction anymore. And you deserve someone who... You added Dominic as co-owner of your LLC 6 months ago, Jordan said. His voice was the same temperature it had been for the entire conversation. Not raised, not cold, simply level. Annika stopped. $23,000 from our joint savings funded the startup costs. His name is on the paperwork. You were still legally my wife when you filed that registration. Jordan set his water glass down precisely. We can discuss the marriage, or we can discuss the money. I'm not doing both in the same conversation. The warmth didn't drain from Annika's face all at once. It went the way heat leaves a room when the source is cut. Gradually, completely, until what remained was just the structure underneath. She had come in with a plan. The plan had a shape. She would be generous. She would be mature. She would let him have his feelings, and then she would gently redirect the narrative toward the version she needed him to accept. She had prepared for grief. She had prepared for anger, the kind she could manage, the kind that needed to be soothed and guided. She had prepared for a man who needed something from her. She had not prepared for documentation. Her mouth opened slightly, closed. She looked at Jordan the way someone looks at a building they thought they had mapped when they realize there is a floor they never found. She stopped. Jordan waited. She didn't finish the sentence. She reached for her latte, and then she didn't pick it up. She pulled her bag from the back of her chair and stood with the deliberate movement of someone who has decided the fastest exit is the most dignified one. I'll have my attorney reach out, she said. That's the right move, Jordan said. She left without finishing her coffee. The latte sat on the table, still steaming. Jordan watched through the window as she pushed through the door and hit the sidewalk at a pace that had nothing casual in it. Her hand was already at her ear before she reached the end of the block. He could see her mouth moving, see the gestures she made when she was reporting something she didn't like, the short, chopping motion of her free hand, the way her pace quickened when the conversation was not going the way she needed it to. He did not watch to feel something. He watched because watching told him things. What he saw was not a love story absorbing pressure. It was two people whose entire plan had been built on a foundation of Jordan's stillness, and Jordan had declined to be still. He called the server over, settled the check, left a tip on the table, picked up his jacket, and walked to his car. He drove directly to Camille's office. The call came on a Wednesday morning. Jordan was at his desk reviewing cable tension specs when Camille's name lit up his screen. He answered on the first ring. I need you in my office. Her voice had that particular flatness it got when she was carrying something heavy. Today. Before noon if you can. I'll be there at 11. Camille's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown, clean-lined and uncluttered in the way that matched its owner. A legal pad on the desk, 2 coffee cups already waiting, a folder sitting closed in the center of the table like something that knew what it contained. Jordan sat down. He did not reach for the folder. Camille sat across from him and folded her hands over it. Discovery came back this morning, she said. Mandatory financial disclosure. Annika's attorney submitted everything required. She paused. I don't think her attorney knew what was in it. Jordan waited. Camille opened the folder and turned it to face him. It was a printed email chain, 31 pages. The header showed 2 names in the to and from fields, Annika Briggs and Tasha Cummings. Jordan recognized Tasha's name the way you recognize the face of someone you trusted, without ever deciding to. She had sat at his Thanksgiving table twice. She had hugged him at his own wedding. She had told him once, at a birthday dinner for Annika, that he was the best thing that ever happened to her, genuinely. He picked up the first page and began to read. The emails spanned 18 months. They were not emotional. That was the first thing Jordan noticed. There was no guilt in them, no ambivalence, no language that suggested Annika had wrestled with any of it. They were operational. They had the tone of two people planning a renovation. Practical, specific, moving efficiently from problem to solution. D's portfolio needs to hit 2.4 before we can move. His guy says 6 to 8 months. I just need to stay stable until then. The LLC is the cleanest move. Get it registered before the filing so it doesn't look like a marital asset. D has a vendor connection who can do the co-ownership paperwork quietly. I'm keeping the Houston thing quiet. He thinks it was about my community here. If he takes that job, the money situation changes, and the whole timeline shifts. Jordan read that last line twice. He had turned down $40,000 more a year. He had emailed the Houston firm a polite decline on a Sunday afternoon, sitting at the same kitchen island where he later found the divorce papers. He had done it because Annika sat across from him at dinner and said, with genuine-looking eyes, that Atlanta was her home and she was not ready to leave the life they had built. She had not been protecting her home. She had been protecting a timeline. His income was a variable in their equation. His loyalty was a mechanism. His decision to stay, the one he made out of love, out of the belief that a marriage required sacrifice, had been anticipated, engineered, and logged as a line item in a plan he never knew existed. He turned the page. Jay is so steady. That's the thing about him. He won't blow up. He won't chase. He'll sign and move on, and that's exactly what we need him to do. D agrees. Low resistance probability. Once the settlement clears, we move straight into the Buckhead property. D already has the walkthrough scheduled. Jordan set the page down flat on the desk. He was quiet for a moment. The Houston decision, he said, was deliberate. Camille said, yes. He nodded once. He picked up the next page. He read the rest of it the same way he had read the divorce papers the night they arrived. Carefully, completely, without rushing. Each page was a different dimension of the same structure, and he needed to understand the full load before he assessed the damage. Camille watched him and said nothing. She was the kind of person who understood that silence, in moments like this, was not an absence of support. When he finished, he squared the pages against the desk and set them back in the folder. The LLC co-ownership, Camille said, we already had as financial misconduct. But this, she tapped the folder, this is the architecture of the whole thing. The timeline, the coordination, the Houston maneuver. Dominic named as a planning partner across 18 months. She paused. This is not a divorce with complications, Jordan. This is a fraud case that used a marriage as its operating structure. She removed her glasses and set them on the desk. A small gesture. The closest Camille ever came to expressing something she couldn't say in a courtroom. I'm filing an amended counterclaim today, she said. Financial fraud, civil conspiracy, both of them named Annika and Dominic Frazier. It goes into Fulton County Public Record the moment it's filed. Any lender, any investor, any partner running due diligence on Dominic's name will find it. Jordan sat still. He was thinking about load-bearing walls, about what they actually were. Not decorative, not structural in the visible sense, but the interior elements that made the whole thing stand. Remove one quietly, while the building was still occupied, and nothing looked different from the outside, right up until the moment everything came down. He looked up from the folder. All right, he said. Let's finish this. The mediation room was on the third floor of a building off Peachtree Street. It had no windows that faced anything interesting, just a long table, 6 chairs, a water pitcher nobody touched, and fluorescent light that made everyone look like they had not slept enough. Jordan arrived first. He was wearing a dark gray suit he had not worn since a city council presentation 2 years prior. No tie, he set nothing on the table. Camille came in 30 seconds behind him, placed a single manila folder in front of her chair, and sat down. That was all they brought. Annika arrived 4 minutes later with a man Jordan did not recognize. Tall, briefcase. The particular expression of a litigator who had reviewed this file recently and did not love what he found. A private litigator. Not the general practice attorney who had drafted the original divorce filing, someone else. Someone retained specifically for a proceeding that had stopped being simple. Annika did not look at Jordan when she came in. She sat down across from Camille and arranged her hands on the table in front of her the way a person does when they are trying to look composed and know it. The mediator, a woman named Patricia Hollins, introduced herself briefly and explained the process to the room as though everyone needed the orientation. Jordan watched Annika while she watched the mediator. She was dressed well. She always dressed well. Her expression was carefully neutral, not cold, but managed, the way Annika managed everything she wanted people to see. What Jordan noticed, because he always noticed structural things, was the small tension at the corners of her jaw, the kind that meant she was holding something in that wanted to come out. Annika's litigator opened. The revised settlement proposal was 22 pages. The man walked through it in measured sections, professional, unhurried, making it sound like a reasonable accommodation from a reasonable person. The 401k claim had been scaled back from the original filing. The joint liquid assets were split at a reduced percentage favorable to Jordan. There were concessions, but at the center of it, unchanged, was the LLC. Her attorney used the word separate 4 times in 6 minutes. Pre-existing professional asset. Independent operation. Personal exemption under Georgia Equitable Distribution Guidelines. He cited 2 cases. He used the phrase established business identity without any visible awareness of the irony. He finished. The room was quiet. The mediator looked toward Camille. Camille opened the folder. She did not make a speech about it. She simply began placing documents on the table in a row, the way a person lays out tools before starting work. Each one set down with the clean economy of someone who has done this before and does not need the theater. LLC registration document. The $23,000 in traced bank transfers from the joint savings account. Each transaction highlighted in yellow. Warren Briggs's sworn statement. 4 pages. Notarized. Dated. Describing Dominic Frazier's call in specific detail. The questions he asked. The order he asked them. The things he was trying to find out. Then the Tasha email chain. 31 pages. Then the amended counterclaim. Civil conspiracy and financial fraud. Both names printed clearly at the top. Annika Briggs. Dominic Frazier. Then, last, a single-page letter. Camille set it in front of the mediator and let her read the header before she spoke. 48 hours ago, Dominic Frazier's personal attorney contacted our office requesting that his client's name be removed from the LLC co-ownership dispute. She paused. The request is entered here as evidence of Mr. Frazier's awareness of his legal exposure. It also confirms that the co-ownership arrangement was understood by both parties to carry legal risk, which is not consistent with the claim that the LLC is a simple, pre-existing personal asset. The mediator read. She did not make a sound, but the quality of her silence changed with each page. It got heavier, more considered, the way a room feels different when the temperature drops, and nobody has said anything yet. Camille spoke with no extra weight in her voice. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. The LLC was a marital asset by method of funding. $23,000 from joint savings was not ambiguous. The co-ownership filing, executed during the marriage with a man who had been conducting an affair with Anika for 14 months, was not an oversight. Warren Briggs's statement documented coordinated, premeditated targeting of Jordan's financial profile, and the 18-month email timeline established that the divorce was not a decision Annika arrived at. It was a scheduled event, planned around a financial milestone, designed to extract maximum value from a marriage that had been treated as a vehicle long before the papers were ever drawn up. Annika's litigator said, "I'd like to request a brief recess." 1 moment. Jordan's voice was even. Not loud, Not hard. Just present enough that it stopped the room. He looked at Annika. She looked back at him. Her expression did not move, but her hands, still flat on the table, pressed slightly harder against the surface. "You told me you weren't ready to leave Atlanta," Jordan said. "I believe that. I turned down $40,000 more a year and a project that would have changed my career because I thought I was choosing our marriage." He did not rush it. 3 months after I sent that email, you were in a hotel 2 miles from our house with Dominic. You had already been planning the exit for 3 months before that. You kept my income in the marriage for a full year after you had made your decision, because the timeline required it. You used $23,000 of our money to build a business with his name on it. And you used my steadiness, the thing you called safe every time someone asked about me, as a financial instrument. He held her gaze. "I need you to hear me say that directly and clearly. Not because I need anything from you, because I am not going to let it go unnamed." A pause. "That is the last thing I will ever say to you." The room held. Annika did not speak. She had spent 14 months constructing a story about this man. Who he was, what he lacked, why she deserved more than what he offered. She had told it so many times, in so many rooms, that she had half believed it herself. She was good at that. She was very good at that. But there was no version of the story available to her right now. Not in this room, with these documents on the table, and Jordan looking at her with the flat, unbothered clarity of a man who has already checked the math. She had nothing to reframe. The adjournment was called at 11:14 a.m. Annika's litigator said he needed 48 hours to consult with his client. The mediator noted it on her pad. Chairs scraped back. People gathered their things. Jordan buttoned his jacket and walked out. Camille fell into step beside him in the hallway. They did not debrief until they reached the elevator, and even then she kept it brief. 48 hours means she's doing math, Camille said. The math is not going to work in her favor. Jordan nodded. They rode down in silence. Outside on Peachtree, the October air was sharp and clean, the sky a hard pale blue above the buildings. Jordan stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his hands in his pockets. He did not feel what he expected to feel, which was relief. What he felt was quieter than that, more structural, like a calculation that has finally been checked by a second set of eyes and confirmed. He drove home, changed out of the gray suit, hung it back in the closet with the same care he'd taken putting it on. Then he called Zara. She picked up on the second ring, and he could hear from the background that she was between things. A door, footsteps, the clean, compressed sound of a hospital corridor. He told her how the mediation went in the same plain language he used for everything. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Are you okay?" "Yeah," he said, and meant it. "Okay." A pause. "I'll bring food tonight. You shouldn't be in that house alone eating whatever you think counts as dinner." He smiled at the wall. "I eat fine." "Jordan, you had a granola bar and called it lunch last Tuesday. I was there." He let the smile stay. "Okay." Dominic's world contracted on a Thursday morning, 31 hours after the adjournment. The call came from a loan officer at a commercial lender his firm had been working with for months. A refinancing application on a corridor property. Straightforward paperwork. The kind of transaction Dominic had closed a dozen times. The officer's tone was measured and careful in the way that institutional voices get when the news is not good, but the relationship is still technically intact. There was an active civil fraud claim attached to Dominic's name in Fulton County Public Record. The lender's compliance department had flagged it during routine review. They would need a meeting before the application could advance. Dominic said he understood and would be in touch. He set the phone down and stared at his desk for a moment. 5 hours later, a letter arrived through counsel from the 3-investor development partnership he had been building for 8 months. $2.1 million in committed capital. a mixed-use corridor project he had described to 3 separate people in the past month as the best opportunity in his portfolio. The letter was 4 sentences. It cited the active civil matter. It used the phrase pending full resolution. It was signed by all 3 investors. He called Annika. She picked up the first time. He told her about the lender. She was quiet. He told her about the partnership letter. She said, "Dominic, they're pausing. That's 2 things in one day, Annika." "I know. We need to talk about how we handle—" "I need to talk to my attorney." She hung up. He called back. She let it ring. He called a 3rd time. Voicemail. He drove to her apartment that evening. She opened the door and let him in, which he understood later was a mistake. Not for the reasons he expected, but because what happened inside the apartment was the kind of conversation that does not stay inside apartments. The neighbor in Unit 4B heard most of it through the shared wall. Not every word. Enough. It was not a couple holding together under pressure. It was not 2 people working through something hard. It was the sound of a plan being taken apart, piece by piece, while both people tried to establish that the pieces were not their responsibility. Dominic had wanted an uncontested exit, a clean transaction. Jordan's passivity had been part of the plan, factored in, accounted for, confirmed by the research he had done, including the call to Warren Briggs, which he did not bring up now and would not bring up again. Annika had wanted the LLC, the settlement, the transition already in motion. She had wanted to step sideways out of one life and directly into another without the floor ever moving. The floor had moved. By the time Dominic left, they were not arguing about Jordan anymore. They were arguing about each other, which is what happens when the external structure collapses and people are left standing in what was always the actual foundation. It was not solid. It had never been tested. It had only ever needed to hold long enough for the other plan to work. It had not held. The 48th hour came at 9:06 a.m. on a Saturday. Camille called Jordan while he was in the kitchen. He put her on speaker. Annika's revised settlement had arrived through counsel. Full release of the 401k. No claim, no negotiation, gone. Reduced percentage of joint liquid assets. And the LLC surrendered. She did not have the capital to buy out the marital interest from the estate. The business she had built on Jordan's money, with Dominic's vendor network providing the connective tissue, was no longer hers to keep. Jordan listened to all of it. He said, "Okay, file the acceptance." "Already typed," Camille said. He took the phone off speaker and stood at the kitchen window for a moment. The yard was plain and still in the morning light. A single oak tree at the far edge, already turning. 3 weeks later, the development partnership dissolved formally, when 2 of the 3 investors withdrew their capital commitments. The refinancing closed, eventually, at a reduced amount. After additional documentation requirements, the lender's compliance team added to his file. Dominic's Atlanta portfolio was intact. He still had properties. He still had deals. But his name now lived in a public county record alongside the words civil fraud claim. And in Atlanta's commercial real estate community, where due diligence moved faster than capital and reputation was the first thing anyone searched, that entry was a permanent feature of any table he tried to sit down at. He was smaller than he was. In his world, smaller was a direction that did not reverse easily. Warren had stayed in Atlanta 3 days longer than he planned. He did not explain why. He did not need to. On his last evening, he and Jordan sat on the back porch after dinner. No particular agenda. The air had gone cool, and the yard was dark past the porch light. Warren had a cup of coffee he was mostly not drinking. Jordan had his hands loosely around a glass. The quiet between them was the kind that belongs to people who have shared enough hard things that silence stopped needing to be filled years ago. After a long while, Warren said, "You handled that like your grandfather would have." He looked out at the yard. He was quiet too. People kept mistaking it for soft. Jordan looked out at the same yard. "I know," he said. The offer letter arrived on a Wednesday morning in a plain envelope from a firm whose name Jordan had known since his first year in the field. The kind of name that circulated in engineering programs the way certain bridges circulated in textbooks. Not famous for flash, famous for work that was still standing 50 years after anyone expected it to be. He read the letter at his kitchen table with his coffee, all the way through. Every line. Project Director. 3 municipal infrastructure contracts under his direct oversight, including the bridge expansion that had been his for 2 years now. His from the first calculations, his in the design, and now his to lead from the ground up to the ribbon cutting. The compensation package was listed on page 2. He read that line twice, not because he didn't believe it, because he wanted to be accurate. It was more than Houston had offered. More than Houston had offered by enough that the number sat with him for a moment in a specific way. Not triumphant, not bitter. Just precise. The way a final measurement is precise when it confirms what the preliminary work already suggested. He set the letter on the table, picked up his pen, signed it on the designated line the way he signed everything, deliberately, completely, without any portion of himself withheld. Then he folded it back into the envelope, sealed it, and set it beside his keys. Warren Briggs turned 62 on a Saturday in late October, and the house filled up the way it used to fill up when Jordan was a boy. Loud and warm, and completely without agenda. The way a house only fills when the people inside it are not performing anything for each other. His Aunt Renee arrived first, and immediately took ownership of the kitchen. His cousin Darius showed up with his wife and their 2 kids, who had apparently made a group decision to test every surface in the house for structural integrity. His Aunt Gloria came in already mid-conversation with someone on her phone and finished the conversation standing in the front hallway with her coat still on. 3 more cousins, 2 neighbors Warren had known since Savannah. The full, warm, opinionated apparatus of the Briggs family, filling every room the way they always had, completely and without apology. Jordan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched it settle into place around him and felt something ease in his chest that he had not noticed was tightened until just then. The aunts were different with him. Not obviously, not in a way that required comment, but he felt it, the way they spoke to him directly now, without the careful, cushioned politeness they had maintained across years of dinners and holidays when Annika was present. Aunt Renee handed him a spoon and told him to taste the rice without preamble, as if this had always been the arrangement. Aunt Gloria pulled him into a hug that lasted longer than their hugs usually lasted and did not explain it. Darius found him on the back porch early in the evening and stood beside him for a moment before saying, "I never told you this, but we never fully relaxed when she was here." He said it the way men in this family said true things, plainly, without decoration, and without waiting to see if the landing was soft. Just always felt like the room was being managed. Jordan nodded. "Yeah," he said. Darius clapped him once on the shoulder and went back inside. Annika was not there. Her absence was not a wound. It was not a hollow or an ache or something that needed to be carefully stepped around. It was a cleared site, ground that had been properly remediated, leveled, and made ready to hold something real. Zara had arrived 40 minutes after the first guests and moved through the house with the ease of a woman who did not require permission to be comfortable somewhere. He watched her from the kitchen doorway. She was in the living room now with his youngest cousin, laughing at something with her whole face. Not the restrained version of a laugh that people perform in unfamiliar rooms, but the actual version. She had spent 20 minutes in the kitchen with Aunt Renee when she first arrived and come out knowing exactly where everything was. Jordan did not assess what he was watching. The assessment had already been made by everyone in the house, and it had been made in the first 20 minutes, with the quiet, collective accuracy of people who had known each other long enough to recognize what was real. She caught his eye from across the room. Didn't do anything with it. Just a look. The kind that said, "I see you standing there," without needing to add anything else. He went to refill his glass. Warren stood for the toast at the end of the meal, which meant the table went quiet fast. Because Warren standing meant something was going to be said worth hearing. He looked around the table, took his time doing it. Then he raised his glass. "To the people in this room," he said, "and to good engineering." Jordan's laugh started low, from somewhere deep in his chest, and it meant every single thing that needed to be meant. 3 months after mediation, Annika's event coordination business relaunched under a new name. Smaller, leaner, built without Dominic's vendor network running underneath it, and without Jordan's capital as its foundation. She was starting over in the most complete sense of the phrase, from the ground, on her own, without the infrastructure that had made the first version possible. Dominic's civil claim moved through the court system at the pace civil claims move, which is slow and steady and entirely without mercy. It remained active in Fulton County Public Record, searchable by any lender or investor or partner who ran his name through a standard due diligence search. He still worked. He still had properties. He was still in the room in Atlanta's commercial real estate world. He was just smaller in it. And in that world, smaller did not reverse. Neither consequence was dramatic. Neither came with a scene or a confrontation or a final visible reckoning. They were simply permanent. The structural consequence of building something on a foundation that was never yours, and discovering, too late, that the man who built the real thing had not left anything behind when he walked away from it. The bridge project broke ground on a Thursday morning in October. Jordan stood at the edge of the site in his hard hat, with a coffee cup that had gone mostly cold, watching the first equipment move into position. The early light was low and sharp, cutting long shadows across the raw earth, and the full scope of the structure, the span of it, the ambition of it, was visible now in a way it had only been visible on paper until this morning. Zara stood beside him, her own hard hat slightly too large, a coffee cup in both hands. She looked out at the site for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "It's bigger than I imagined." Jordan looked at the steel rising from the ground, at the cables and the concrete and the load-bearing architecture of something built to last, built correctly, built with the full weight of everything it would need to hold, factored in from the very first calculation. Wait till it's done. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.